Welcome to Velvet Chronicles, where every secret changes destiny. Tonight's story begins. Snow does not care about high society. It doesn't care about dowries, titles, or ruined reputations. It only freezes whatever is left out in it. When Alistair, Duke of Thornecliffe, found a woman shivering in a snowdrift outside an abandoned chapel, he expected a beggar. Instead, he found a bride. Not just any bride, the intended wife of the man he despised most in the world. He should have ridden past. But he stopped, and that single choice changed everything. The wind howling across the fells of Cumbria sounded like a dying animal, brutal and indifferent. Alistair tightened the collar of his heavy wool coat, urging his gelding forward through the knee-deep drifts. He had no business being out in a blizzard. He was the Duke of Thornecliffe, a man who possessed enough coal and timber to keep his manor's fires blazing into the next century. But one of his tenants' roofs had caved beneath the weight of the ice, and Alistair was not a man who left his people to the mercy of a broken world. He preferred practical problems. A collapsed roof could be mended with timber, nails, and labor. Human nature was far messier, and he had learned long ago to avoid it. His route back to Thorncliffe Manor took him past the stone ruins of the old parish chapel, a bleak, hollowed-out structure the local aristocracy sometimes used for intimate, atmospheric weddings. Today it was nothing but a windbreak. Alistair almost didn't see her. She was a mound of white against a larger mound of white, huddled near the rusted iron gates. If his horse hadn't shied at the sudden flutter of frost-stiffened lace, he would have trotted right past. He pulled back on the reins. The horse stamped, blowing plumes of steam into the freezing air. Alistair narrowed his eyes against the driving sleet. Lace! He dismounted, boots crunching through the icy crust, and approached the shape slowly. It was a woman, curled into a tight ball, arms wrapped around her knees, head tucked down. She wore a gown of ivory silk and delicate tulle, a garment meant for candlelight and champagne, not the jagged teeth of a northern winter. The fabric was plastered to her skin, stiff with frozen sleep. "Madam," Alistair said. His voice was swallowed by the wind. He crouched beside her, reaching out with a heavy, gloved hand to touch her shoulder. She didn't flinch. She was rigid. He swore under his breath, grabbed her shoulder, and pulled her backward. Her head lolled. He knew that face. Isolde Ashworth, daughter of the deeply indebted Earl of Carrow, and, as of noon that day, the bride of Lord Julian Faircross. Faircross. The name tasted like ash in Alistair's mouth. Julian Faircross was a coward dressed in expertly tailored suits, the man who had cheated Alistair's younger brother out of a fortune in a rigged shipping venture, leaving the boy to face debtor's prison, a fate he had avoided only by putting a pistol to his own head. Alistair had sworn to ruin Faircross. For 4 years he had quietly bought up the man's debts, cornered his investments, squeezed the air from his rival's lungs. This wedding to the Ashworth girl was meant to be Faircross's salvation. Her family held an old title and a small, hidden reserve of untitled land. It was a transaction, blood for money. Yet here she was, the bride, discarded in the snow. Alistair looked around. The carriage tracks had already filled, but the deep groove suggested a vehicle departing in a violent hurry. Faircross had bolted, left her at the chapel doors, and it did not matter which, he had left her to freeze. Isolde's lips were tinted a terrifying shade of blue, her skin the color of skimmed milk, her breathing a barely perceptible rattle. Alistair's mind worked with cold precision. Leave her, and she would be dead within the hour. Faircross would return to town, spin a tale of an absent bride, and play the victim. Take her home, and the scandal would destroy the Ashworths by morning. A jilted bride returned half dead in a storm, the vultures of society picking their bones clean. He looked at her face again. Even half frozen, there was a stubborn set to her jaw. She did not deserve this. No one deserved to be discarded like refuse. He stripped off his coat without hesitation, wrapped the thick wool around her shivering frame, and lifted her into his arms. She weighed nothing, hollow bones and ruined silk. He hauled her toward his horse, which sidestepped, nervous at the awkward burden. "Steady," Alistair barked. He threw her across the saddle, climbed up behind her, and pulled her against his chest. The cold radiating from her body was shocking, bleeding through his linen shirt. She was a block of ice. He spurred the horse forward, thinking nothing of the gossip that would follow, only of the fire in his hearth and the dark satisfaction he would take in making Julian Faircross pay for this. Thorncliffe Manor was a fortress of dark stone and heavy oak. When Alistair kicked the front doors open, carrying the unconscious bride in his arms, the silence of the grand foyer shattered. Mrs. Pemberton, his housekeeper, rushed from the drawing-room, took one look at the frozen bundle of silk and wool, and swallowed her questions whole. She was a woman who understood emergencies. The Rose guest chamber, she ordered a startled footman. Light the fire, bring hot bricks, and send for Dr. Hale, now. Alistair carried Isolde up the grand staircase, his own teeth chattering, his body finally registering the loss of his coat. He laid her on the heavy four-poster bed. "Out, Your Grace," Mrs. Pemberton said, her tone leaving no room for a duke's authority. "She must be stripped of these wet things at once, or the cold will stop her heart. We must warm her slowly." Alistair went to his study, poured a measure of whiskey, and drank it neat. It burned a path down his throat. He poured another. 2 hours passed. The storm worsened outside, battering the mullioned windows, while inside the house moved with frantic, muffled purpose, maids carrying basins of warm water and stacks of thick blankets up the stairs. When Dr. Hale finally arrived, looking like a drowned man himself, he spent an hour in the room before emerging to find Alistair waiting in the corridor. "She will live," the doctor said wearily, but it was a near thing. Her body temperature dropped dangerously low. "Expect a fever over the next few days. The frostbite on her fingers and toes is mild. She must have kept moving before she collapsed. And her mind? Delirious. Muttering, crying out. It is a shock to the system, Your Grace, the physical trauma, and whatever led to a bride being abandoned at a ruined chapel in a blizzard." The doctor studied him carefully, knowing better than to ask further. For 2 days Alistair barely left the room. He told himself it was to safeguard his investment. She was the key to finally destroying Faircross. But as he sat there in the quiet hours, listening to her ragged breathing, the excuse felt thin. He listened to her fevered dreams. She did not weep for Faircross. She did not cry out for a lost love. Instead, her delirium was filled with practical, terrified calculations. "The debts," she muttered, head tossing on the pillow. "The creditors. The house in Ashford Square. They will take the horses. Father, please," he promised to pay. She was not mourning a broken heart. She was mourning a broken contract. On the morning of the 3rd day, the fever broke. Alistair was reading a ledger by the window when the rustle of sheets made him look up. Isolde's eyes were open, a sharp, startling grey, clouded with confusion before they focused, moving over the velvet curtains, the roaring fire, and finally him. "You are Alistair Vane," she said, her voice a dry croak. "I am." He poured a glass of water and brought it to her. She struggled upright, weak, arms trembling, and drank slowly, wincing as it went down her raw throat. "This is Thorncliffe Manor," she stated. "How long?" 3 days. She closed her eyes. A shudder ran through her that had nothing to do with the cold. 3 days missing was ruin for any woman in her world. 3 days missing for a bride was a scandal that would be in the broadsheets by morning. "He left me," she said quietly, flat, the tone of someone stating a brutal mathematical fact. He received a letter from his solicitor just as the vicar arrived. He read it, turned pale, said he had urgent business, got into his carriage, and drove away. "He took my coat by mistake." Alistair felt a cold spike of anger. Faircross, always a coward. "My agents finally tightened the net," he said, his voice equally flat. "Faircross is bankrupt. The shipping lines he relied on collapsed a week ago. The news only just reached him. He couldn't afford your father's debts anymore, so he fled. Likely for the continent. Isolde opened her eyes and looked at him, processing the information with frightening speed. She did not ask how he knew. Everyone knew the Duke of Thornecliffe hated Julian Faircross. "You ruined him," she said. "I did." She let out a dry, humorless laugh. "And in doing so, you ruined me. The creditors will descend on my father's house by week's end. We will be turned out, and I am entirely disgraced." Her grey eyes flashed with sudden fire. "Why didn't you simply leave me, or take me home?" "Taking you home would have meant facing the scandal immediately," Alistair said calmly, "and leaving you to die was not an option. I am a cynical man, Miss Ashworth. But I am not a monster." "No," she said bitterly. "You are simply an opportunist. You have your enemy's ruined bride in your spare bedroom. What a wonderful trophy. What an exquisite way to humiliate him further." Alistair leaned forward, forearms on his knees, studying her. Battered, exhausted, terrified, and still fighting him. Not asking for pity. Demanding agency. "I don't deal in trophies, Miss Ashworth," he said softly. "I deal in solutions." By the fourth day the storm had passed, leaving a blindingly bright, frozen world. Isolde sat by the fire in the morning room, wrapped in a heavy wool shawl belonging to Mrs. Pemberton, holding a cup of tea she had not tasted, staring into the flames. The panic had burned itself out during the fever, leaving cold, hard ash. She was ruined. Her family was ruined. The life she had been raised for, the polite teas, the London season, the strategic marriage, had evaporated in the snow outside the chapel. She heard the heavy tread of boots. Alistair entered, dressed for riding, tall boots and a dark tailored coat emphasizing the breadth of his shoulders. He did not look like the gentleman she was used to in drawing rooms. He looked like a man who worked the land, tough and unyielding. He took the seat opposite her and set a stack of papers on the small table between them. "The roads are clear enough for a carriage," he said. "I can have you return to your father's estate by nightfall." Isolde tightened her grip on the teacup. "To what end?" "The bailiffs are likely there already." "My father is a weak man, Your Grace. He relied entirely on Lord Faircross's promises. Without them he will collapse. I will return to a house of weeping and recrimination." "You cannot stay here indefinitely," Alistair pointed out. "The servants talk. The village talks. Within a week the rumour reaches town that you ran off with me, that we conspired against Faircross." "Let them say what they like," Isolde snapped, sudden anger cutting through her lethargy. "They will shred my reputation regardless. If I go back, I am the pathetic jilted bride. If I stay, I am the scandalous fallen woman. The result is the same. I have no currency left in this world." Alistair watched her, the set of her jaw, the way she did not look away. Not crumbling. Assessing the battlefield. "You have one piece of currency left," he said quietly. "And what is that?" "Your hatred of Julian Faircross." She stared at him, taken aback. "Hatred is not currency. It doesn't pay the butcher. It does, if invested properly." He leaned back, folding his hands. "Let us speak plainly, Miss Ashworth. We are both unsentimental people. You agreed to marry Faircross to save your family, a business transaction. He broke the contract. He abandoned me," she corrected, voice tightening. "He left you to die," Alistair amended brutally. "He discarded you the moment you ceased to be a convenient asset. He humiliated you. He humiliated your family." Isolde swallowed hard, fighting the sting of tears. She would not cry in front of this man. "I am aware of my circumstances, Your Grace." "You needn't outline them." "I outline them because I want you to understand the alternative I am about to offer." He picked up the top sheet of parchment, dense with legal script. "I want to destroy whatever remains of Julian Faircross. I bankrupted him, yes, but he will scurry abroad, find some wealthy widow, and rebuild. He will spin a tale of how he was forced to flee, how the Ashworths deceived him. He will survive. He paused, dark eyes locking onto hers. Unless we make him a laughingstock. Unless we take the one thing he paraded as his prize and use it to sever him from decent society forever. Isolde's breath hitched. What are you suggesting? Marry me. The words hung in the air, heavy and absurd. She let out a short, incredulous breath. Marry you? You are mad. I am entirely rational, Alistair said smoothly. Think of it. If you return home, you are ruined. If you marry me, you are the Duchess of Thornecliffe. Your father's debts will be settled by my solicitors before noon tomorrow. Your family's estate will be secure. You will have more wealth and standing than Faircross could ever have offered. And what do you gain from this? She demanded, suspicious. Men like the Duke of Thornecliffe did not hand out charity. Revenge, he said simply. Absolute, undeniable revenge. Faircross left you in the cold. I will take you, elevate you above him, and parade you through every drawing room in town. He will be known forever as the fool who threw away a duchess. His pride will be shattered, and no respectable family will do business with him again for fear of offending me. Isolde stared at him. It was a cold, calculated proposition, no pretense of romance, no soft words about rescue or affection. A tactical alliance. You would bind yourself to a woman you do not know, simply to spite an enemy. I know that you survived a winter storm that would have killed most men, Alistair said. I know that you woke from a fever and calculated your financial ruin instead of weeping over a broken heart. You are pragmatic, Miss Ashworth. I need a wife who understands duty over sentiment. I need a duchess who will not flinch. I believe you are that woman. Isolde looked down at her hands, fingertips still raw and peeling from the frostbite. She thought of Faircross in his warm carriage, driving away while she stood freezing by the iron gates. She thought of her father pacing his study, waiting for the bailiffs. She had been raised to be a pawn, traded for debts, discarded when the debts came due. Alistair Vane was offering her a place at the board. Not love, but armor. A weapon. She looked up. Firelight reflected in her grey eyes, turning them to forged steel. My father's debts must be paid in full, she said, voice steady. My younger sister must have a dowry secured, so she is never forced into a desperate match. Alistair's mouth twitched with the ghost of a smile. Done. And I will not be a prisoner in this house, she added. If I am to be your duchess, I will be a partner in this arrangement, not a prop. I would expect nothing less. He slid the parchment across the table with a silver fountain pen. The settlements, drafted this morning. Read them. If they meet your approval, sign them. We leave for town tomorrow. We marry by special license on Friday. Isolde looked at the paper. The end of the life she had known, and the beginning of something entirely unknown. She reached out with her healing, aching fingers, picked up the pen, and signed her name without hesitation. The wedding was as cold as the blizzard that had brought them together. There was no crumbling chapel, no frost-stiffened veil, no terrified bride. They stood in the damp, cavernous office of a high-ranking bishop in town, surrounded by dark oak paneling and the sharp smell of old paper. Isolde wore a walking dress of dark, bruised plum, Alistair wore charcoal grey. They did not look at each other as they recited the vows, speaking the sacred words with the clipped efficiency of merchants finalizing a shipping manifest. When the bishop pronounced them husband and wife, Alistair did not kiss her. He simply nodded, signed the register with a heavy slash of ink, and held out his arm. Isolde took it, her fingers, still tender in thin cotton gloves, resting lightly on his forearm. They stepped out into the damp soot of a city afternoon as the Duke and Duchess of Thornecliffe. The townhouse in Ashford Square was a beast of white stone and wrought iron, more intimidating than welcoming. Inside it ran on silent, invisible labor, footmen moving like shadows, maids averting their eyes, the whole house a reflection of its master, efficient, imposing, devoid of warmth. Isolde's new chambers were vast, the bed draped in heavy crimson velvet, the carpets thick enough to swallow her footsteps. She stood at its center, listening to the muffled rumble of carriage wheels on the cobblestones outside. 2 days. It had taken 2 days for Alistair's solicitors to clear her father's debts. The Earl of Carrow was solvent again. Her sister's dowry was secured in a trust their father could not touch. She had done it, bought her family's survival with her own life. She walked to the mirror above the dressing table. She looked pale, the fever having stripped the softness from her face, leaving sharp cheekbones and hollows beneath her eyes. She did not look like a blushing bride. She looked like a survivor. The door adjoining her room to Alistair's opened without a knock. He entered, unapologetic. Boundaries were an illusion in a marriage of this nature, carrying a flat rectangular box covered in worn black velvet. "Tonight is the Earl of Stanbridge's ball," he said, stopping a few feet behind her, their eyes meeting in the silvered glass. "Everyone who is anyone will be there. The rumors have had 5 days to fester. By now they will have decided you threw yourself at me, or that I orchestrated your ruin to steal you." "Does it matter what they decide?" Isolde asked quietly. "No. But how you face them matters." He set the box on the dressing table and flipped the brass latch. Inside, resting on faded silk, lay a collar of diamonds, not modern, delicate cuts, but old stones, heavy and blunt, mined a century past. They looked less like jewelry than a glittering shackle. "The Thornecliffe diamonds," Alistair said. "My mother hated them. Said they felt like a hangman's noose." Isolde touched the largest stone. It was ice cold. "Why do you want me to wear them?" "Because society respects weight," he answered. "They respect money, and they respect power. They want to see a ruined girl tonight. They want to see you lower your eyes and apologize for surviving. You will not give them that satisfaction. You will wear these stones. You will carry my title. You will walk into that ballroom and make them feel small." Isolde turned to face him. He stood close. She could smell soap, starch, and the faint bitter scent of the cheroots he smoked in his study. "I am not afraid of them, Your Grace," she said. "Alistair," he corrected softly. "If we are going to war together, you will call me Alistair." He stepped closer, lifting the heavy diamond collar from the box with surprisingly gentle hands. "Turn around." She obeyed, feeling the chill of the metal against her collarbone, then the brush of his knuckles at the nape of her neck as he fastened the clasp. The contrast was startling, the freezing bite of the diamonds and the dry heat of his skin. A strange shiver ran down her spine. It wasn't fear. It was an awakening. "There," Alistair murmured, his breath stirring the hair near her ear. "Armor." Isolde looked in the mirror again. The diamonds caught the candlelight, flashing like drawn blades at her throat. The hollow, exhausted girl was gone. The Duchess of Thornecliffe stared back. "Let us go, then," she said. "Let them look." The Stanbridge ballroom was a suffocating sea of silk, perfume, and whispered malice. 1,000 candles dripped wax from crystal chandeliers, the air was thick with the heat of bodies and the hum of 100 conversations. When the majordomo struck his staff against the marble floor, the hum died. "His Grace, the Duke of Thornecliffe," he bellowed, his voice echoing up the sweeping staircase, "and Her Grace, the Duchess of Thornecliffe." The silence that followed was absolute. Alistair offered his arm. Isolde took it, not a desperate clinging hold, but the firm grip of a soldier holding a shield. They descended the stairs, her chin high, her face a mask of bored indifference, the diamonds at her throat throwing fractured rainbows across the marble walls. The crowd parted like water breaking around a stone. Alistair did not smile. He radiated a quiet, lethal energy, his reputation for financial destruction hanging about him like a dark cloak. Beside him, Isolde was a pillar of white silk and ice. "Breathe," Alistair murmured, so softly only she could hear. "I am breathing," she replied through immobile lips. "You are clenching your jaw. It makes you look defensive. Relax." She forced her jaw to unclench. "They are staring. Let them." Before they reached the edge of the dance floor, a woman in emerald green stepped into their path, Lady Winslet, a notorious gossip who wielded her tongue like a butcher's knife. "Your Grace," she simpered, sinking into a curtsy far too deep to be sincere, then turning her predatory gaze to Isolde. "And the new Duchess." Goodness, we were all quite shocked by the news and the speed of it all. "I must say, Isolde, dear, you look remarkably recovered, especially considering the harsh weather you endured last week." The implication was clear: damaged goods, the wound probed for blood. Isolde felt a spike of panic, a ghost of the terror from the snow, and opened her mouth to offer some polite, deflective lie. Alistair's hand tightened over hers, a silent command. "Hold the line." Isolde closed her mouth and let her gaze travel slowly from the feathered turban on Lady Winslet's head to the hem of her over-embellished skirts, with the detached, clinical scrutiny of someone inspecting a lame horse. "Lady Winslet," she said, her voice cool and entirely devoid of warmth. "The weather was indeed harsh. But I find the climate here far more tedious. One must constantly navigate the draft." "The draft, Your Grace." "Yes," Isolde said, stepping closer. "The endless, hollow noise of people who have nothing of value to say, but insist on saying it anyway. It is exhausting, don't you find?" Someone in the crowd behind them choked back a laugh. Lady Winslet's face turned an ugly shade of puce. She opened her mouth and found no words. "If you will excuse us," Alistair interjected, his voice deep and smooth, carrying an unmistakable threat. "My wife promised me this dance." He did not wait for a reply, leading Isolde past the sputtering woman and onto the floor, pulling her into his arms. The waltz was formal, but the way he held her was not, his hand firm at the small of her back, guiding her through the steps with effortless strength. "That was brutal," Alistair said, looking down at her. "Did I overstep?" "No." A slow, genuine smile touched his mouth, transforming his harsh face, making him suddenly, painfully handsome. "It was perfect. She will never dare speak to you like that again." Isolde looked up at him, adrenaline pounding in her ears, the fear gone, replaced by a fierce rush of triumph. She wasn't just surviving. She was fighting back, and he was right there with her. "You don't dance," she pointed out, realizing he moved with surprising grace. "I don't dance for pleasure," Alistair corrected. "I dance for strategy. Right now I need half the men in this room to see that I possess something they cannot have. And I need the women to see that you are untouchable." He spun her, her heavy skirts flaring, and when she came back to him they were chest to chest. For a split second the strategy faded. Isolde felt the hard, steady rhythm of his heart against her ribs, and saw something flicker in his dark eyes that had nothing to do with revenge or standing. It was hunger, raw and unguarded. The music ended. They stepped apart. Polite applause washed over them, but it sounded distant. The air between them had fundamentally shifted. The contract was signed in ink, but the reality of their marriage was suddenly written in blood and heat. For weeks passed. The season raged on, a glittering, exhausting carousel of dinners, theatre parties, and balls. Isolde and Alistair moved through it as an impenetrable unit. Society, ever fickle, soon grew bored of trying to crack their united front. The scandal of the jilted bride morphed into the legend of the Ice Duchess. Men respected Alistair's wealth, women feared Isolde's sharp tongue. They were a terrifyingly successful partnership, and it was tearing them apart. The townhouse in Ashford Square was no longer a silent machine. It was a pressure cooker. The casual touches required for public consumption, a hand at the waist, a lingering glance across the dinner table, had become a private torment. When the doors of their separate chambers closed at night, the silence was deafening. Isolde found herself listening for the creak of floorboards in his room. Alistair found himself staring at the adjoining door, his whiskey growing warm in his hand. Two pragmatic people who had built a perfect trap, only to realize they were caught inside it. The breaking point arrived at the Duke of Aveston's summer exhibition, a sprawling affair in a massive glass conservatory filled with exotic orchids and imported ferns, the humidity oppressive. Isolde had stepped away from the crowd, seeking quiet near a towering display of purple vines, admiring a jagged, carnivorous-looking bloom, when a voice behind her turned her blood to ice. "You always did look stunning in white, Isolde." She went perfectly still. The world seemed to tilt. She did not need to turn to know the voice. The slick, polished arrogance was unmistakable. Julian Faircross. She turned slowly. He stood a few feet away, leaning against a stone pillar, wearing a masterfully tailored coat of navy blue, looking prosperous, entirely unaffected by the ruin he had caused. "Lord Faircross," Isolde said. Her voice did not shake. The weeks of training beside Alistair held firm. Faircross pushed off the pillar, stepping toward her, looking her up and down with a predatory smirk. "I must say, I didn't expect you to recover so quickly, or so profitably. Thornecliffe, of all people. How did you manage it? Did you weep and beg on his doorstep?" The audacity stole her breath for a fraction of a second. He had left her to freeze to death. He had run like a coward. And here he was, mocking her survival. "I managed it," Isolde said, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper, "by possessing the spine that you lack." Faircross laughed, a sharp, ugly sound. "Oh, very brave, very impressive. You are a Duchess now, yes, but we both know the truth. You were my cast-off. Thornecliffe only took you because I discarded you. You are nothing but a pawn in his feud with me." He stepped closer, invading her space, trying to use his height to intimidate her. "He doesn't want you, Isolde. He only wanted to beat me. When he grows bored of the game, you'll be right back where I left you, cold and alone." Isolde looked up at him and saw not the handsome lord who had charmed her father, but a weak, pathetic creature. "You are mistaken, Julian." A deep voice rumbled through the humid air. Faircross jumped, spinning around. Alistair stepped out from behind the wall of ferns, entirely calm, which made him infinitely more terrifying, his eyes fixed and dark. Faircross took a hasty step back, bumping the pillar. "Thornecliffe. We were just conversing." "You were speaking," Alistair corrected, taking a slow, measured step forward. "My wife was simply tolerating the noise." He moved to stand beside Isolde, not touching her. His presence alone was a physical barrier. "I heard you were abroad," he said softly, scurrying around the gambling dens, looking for a gullible widow to fund your next disaster. Faircross flushed, hands clenching. "I'm rebuilding my estate." "No thanks to your thievery, Thornecliffe." "It isn't thievery when you hand me the keys because you're too stupid to read a ledger," Alistair replied, tilting his head, studying him like an insect pinned to a board. "I warned you once, Julian. If you ever crossed my path again, I would finish the job. If you ever speak to my wife again, if you so much as look in her direction across a crowded room, I will not bankrupt you. I will dismantle you. I will buy the debts of everyone you know. I will make you a pariah so toxic that beggars will refuse your coin. Do you understand?" Faircross swallowed hard, the bluster gone, looking at a man who held absolute power and possessed zero mercy. He gave a jerky, terrified nod, turned, and practically ran for the exit. Silence fell over the small alcove, broken only by the drip of condensation from the glass roof. The adrenaline drained out of Isolde, leaving her light-headed, her knees weak. Alistair caught her by the waist before she could stumble, pulling her hard against his chest, his arm locked around her like iron. "Are you all right?" His voice was rough, the calm facade shattered, eyes scanning her face. "Did he touch you?" "No," she breathed, grabbing the lapels of his coat, anchoring herself to his warmth. "He just talked." His jaw clenched. "I should have broken his neck. I should have killed him in the snow that day." "Alistair," she said softly. He stopped talking, looking at her mouth. The distance between them was gone, the contract, the revenge, the society they were trying to manipulate, all of it burned away in the humid, floral air. He didn't ask permission. He bent his head and his mouth crashed down on hers. It wasn't polite. It wasn't a performance. It was desperate, bruising, and furious. A claim. Isolde didn't pull away. She made a soft sound in the back of her throat and pulled him closer, hands knotting in his hair, tasting the bitter tang of his anger and the deep, terrifying heat of his desire, kissing him back with equal ferocity, pouring all the fear and triumph of the last month into the collision of their bodies. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Alistair rested his forehead against hers. "I don't care about the revenge anymore," he whispered, voice ragged. "I don't care about Faircross. I only care about you." Isolde closed her eyes, a single tear slipping free to trace a hot path down her cheek. The ice had finally melted, and the fire underneath was going to consume them both. The carriage ride home was suffocating, the silence inside the velvet-lined cabin no longer the calculated distance of two allies but something heavy and volatile. Isolde stared out at the blurred, gas-lit streets, her lips still humming from the pressure of his mouth, her chest uncomfortably tight. She had spent the last month building a fortress around herself, mortaring the bricks with pragmatism and spite. Alistair had just kicked the door in. He sat across from her, long legs stretched out, staring at his own gloved hands, looking like a man who had just realized he stood on a powder keg with a lit match. "I apologize," Alistair said finally, his voice a low rasp beneath the clatter of iron wheels on cobblestones. Isolde turned her head, studying him in the dim, shifting light. "For what? For silencing a coward, or for kissing your wife?" His jaw tightened. "For losing my temper. For breaking the terms of our agreement. I promised you safety and agency, Isolde. Grabbing you in a public conservatory was neither. It was a lapse in judgment." He was retreating, pulling the armor back on, retreating to the safety of ledgers and contracts. Isolde felt a sudden, sharp flash of anger, not at him, but at the absurdity of their situation. They had survived a winter storm and the vicious teeth of high society. They were not fragile creatures who needed protecting from their own humanity. "Judgment," Isolde repeated. The carriage hit a rut, tossing her slightly. She didn't brace herself, letting the momentum carry her forward, sliding off her seat to kneel on the floorboards between his boots. Alistair stiffened, hands gripping the edge of the leather cushions. "What are you doing?" "I am renegotiating the terms," she said quietly, pulling the heavy leather gloves from his hands and throwing them onto the empty seat. His skin was warm, his knuckles white. She pressed her palms flat against his, lacing their fingers together. "You did not break me in that conservatory, Alistair. You anchored me." When Faircross spoke, I felt the cold again, the ice outside that chapel. "But when you touched me," she swallowed hard, forcing the words out. She had never been taught to speak of desire. Women of her class were taught to endure, to manage, to tolerate. "When you touched me, the cold was gone. I don't want your apologies. I want the man who just threatened to dismantle a lord to protect his wife." Alistair looked down at her, his chest rising and falling in sharp, ragged breaths, the cynical, untouchable Duke of Thornecliffe utterly undone. "Isolde," he whispered, voice cracking. "I have spent for years fueled by nothing but hatred. It is a toxic, ugly thing. It burns hot, but it leaves nothing but ash. I do not know how to be gentle. I do not know how to be a husband in anything but name." "I am not asking for gentle," she said, leaning up to press her cheek against the rough wool of his coat, feeling the frantic, hammering rhythm of his heart against her ear. "I am asking for you. All of you. The anger, the loyalty, the heat. We forged this marriage in ice. Let it burn." Alistair let out a sound half groan, half surrender, sliding off the seat to kneel with her in the cramped space. He framed her face with his large, calloused hands, thumbs tracing the sharp line of her cheekbones, and kissed her again, no hesitation this time. The strategy was dead. The contract was null and void. There was only the desperate, bruising reality of two survivors recognizing each other in the dark. When the carriage finally rolled to a halt in front of the Ashford Square townhouse, the footman opened the door to find the Duke and Duchess seated on opposite sides of the cabin, breathing shallow, clothes rumpled, the air between them crackling with an electric, undeniable current. That night, the adjoining door between their chambers remained open. There were no words spoken in the dark. Only the rustle of heavy silk falling to the floor, the slide of linen, and the profound, grounding weight of bodies pressing together. Isolde learned the map of his scars, the jagged line on his shoulder from a hunting accident, the rough calluses on his hands from years of stubborn manual labor on his estates. Alistair learned the fierce, demanding strength in her grip, the way she didn't simply accept his touch, but challenged it, met it, owned it. It was a reclamation. Faircross had tried to make her a victim. Alistair made her a victor. They woke tangled in the heavy crimson velvet, the grey light of a city morning filtering through the curtains. Alistair was already awake, lying on his back, arm wrapped tightly around her waist. Isolde rested her chin on his chest, tracing the line of his collarbone with her finger. "You are thinking," she murmured, feeling the tension vibrating through his muscles. "I am calculating," Alistair corrected quietly. "Calculating what?" He turned his head, dark eyes meeting hers. "How quickly I can finish ruining Julian Faircross. So we can finally leave this city and go home." Home. He meant Cumbria, the bleak fells and dark stone of Thornecliffe Manor. Isolde felt a fierce, sudden ache in her chest. For the first time in her life, the word did not sound like a prison. It sounded like a promise. Julian Faircross was a man composed entirely of debt and vanity. When Alistair took away his money, the vanity fractured. When Alistair threatened him at the Aveston exhibition, the vanity shattered entirely, leaving behind the primal, ugly desperation of a cornered animal. Faircross owed money to men who did not operate in drawing rooms, men who broke knees before they broke contracts. He needed £30,000 by the end of the month, or he would be pulled from the river in pieces. He knew Alistair Vane would never yield. The Duke was a wall of iron. But Faircross thought he knew Isolde. He remembered the quiet, obedient girl who had sat in her father's parlour, nodding agreeably to his boasts. He thought her a weak link. He thought she could be broken. He chose a Tuesday afternoon when Alistair was occupied at Parliament debating a crucial tariff bill until evening. Isolde had instructed her driver to take her to a modiste on Kingsley Street. She was inspecting a bolt of heavy winter velvet when the hairs on the back of her neck rose, and she turned slowly. Faircross stood by the door of the shop, looking terrible, the tailored coat the same, but the man inside it fraying at the edges, his eyes bloodshot, darting nervously, smelling of stale brandy and fear. The modiste, a shrewd woman who knew the faces of the aristocracy, took one look at the tension in the room and discreetly vanished into the back. "Isolde," Faircross said, stepping forward, his voice reedy and thin, lacking its usual polish. Isolde did not reach for her reticule. She did not look around for her footman waiting by the carriage. She simply stood her ground, hands folded calmly. "Lord Faircross," she said, voice flat. "You are violating the warning my husband gave you. You are a very foolish man. Your husband is not here." Faircross sneered, though a tremor betrayed his hands. He reached into his coat and pulled out a small, tied bundle of letters. "I need £30,000, Isolde, before Friday. And you are going to get it for me from Thorncliffe's accounts." Isolde looked at the letters, then back to his face, feeling a profound, exhausting wave of pity. It was a pathetic sight. "Or what?" "Or I take these to the printers," Faircross said, tapping the letters against his palm. "They are forged, of course, but very good forgeries. They detail a sordid, passionate affair between you and Thorncliffe predating our wedding. They suggest you conspired with the Duke to humiliate me, to fake the abandonment at the chapel so you could run off with his fortune." Isolde didn't blink. "No one will believe that." "They won't care if it's true," Faircross shot back, voice rising in panic. "Society loves a scandal. They love a fallen woman. If these print, your reputation will be ashes. You will be a pariah. And Thorncliffe's pride won't withstand being called a cuckold or a conspirator. He will discard you. He only took you to spite me. If you become a liability, he'll throw you to the wolves. He stepped closer, the smell of sour alcohol washing over her. £30,000, Isolde. It's nothing to him, but it's your life. Bring it to the crooked anchor by Thursday night, or I burn your new life to the ground. Isolde looked at him and thought of the terrified girl freezing in the snow outside the chapel, the fever, the panic, the absolute certainty her life was over. She looked at Faircross and realized something profound. She was no longer afraid of the cold. She was the cold. She reached out and snatched the bundle of letters from his hand, the movement so fast, so precise, that he didn't flinch before she had them. "Hey!" he barked, lunging forward. Isolde stepped back, dropped the letters to the floor, and ground her heel down onto the parchment, leather scraping violently against wood. "Print them," she said, her voice dropping to a terrifying, dead calm. Faircross froze. "What?" "Take your forgeries to the printers. Shout it in the streets. Tell them I am a mastermind. Tell them whatever you like." Isolde stepped closer, invading his space just as he had invaded hers at the exhibition, but she wasn't bluffing. "Do you truly believe I care about the whispers of a society that watched me freeze and did nothing? Do you think the Duke of Thornecliffe, a man who bankrupts lords before breakfast, fears a piece of paper?" Faircross stared at her, mouth opening and closing soundlessly. The rat had hit a steel wall. "You thought you were threatening a frightened bride," Isolde whispered, grey eyes hard and merciless. "But that girl died in the snow, Julian. You left her there. I am the Duchess of Thornecliffe, and you are going to rot." The shop door chimed violently, swinging open to crack against the wall like a pistol shot. Alistair stood in the doorway, still in his parliamentary coat, cravat loosened, breathing hard, as though he had run the whole way. His footman had clearly sent word the moment Faircross approached the shop. Alistair's eyes snapped from Isolde to the letters crushed beneath her boot, and finally to Faircross. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Alistair did not yell. He did not rush. He walked slowly, heavy boots echoing like a death knell on the floorboards. Faircross scrambled backward, tripped over a velvet stool, and crashed to the floor, scuttling until his back hit the counter. "I didn't touch her. I didn't touch her, I swear to God, Thornecliffe." Alistair stopped 3 feet away, looking down at the pathetic, whimpering man. The hatred that had fueled him for 4 years flared, hot and blinding. It would be so easy, a word to his solicitors, a bribe to a magistrate, a few men from the docks. He could erase Julian Faircross from the earth. Justice, for his brother. Justice, for Isolde. He raised his hand. "Alistair." Isolde's voice was quiet, not a plea, a command. He stopped, turning his head slightly. She stood tall, unbowed, unbroken, not looking at Faircross. Looking at him. "He is already dead, Alistair," she said softly. "The debt collectors will have him by Friday. Leave him to the wolves. He is not worth your blood. He is not worth our time." Alistair looked back at Faircross, weeping openly now, a pathetic stream of apologies bubbling from his mouth, a repulsive sight. The grand enemy, the architect of his brother's ruin, was nothing but a hollow shell. The thirst for vengeance, a dry, burning ache in his throat for years, suddenly vanished, evaporating into a profound, startling clarity. Isolde was right. Killing Faircross would not bring his brother back. It would only bind Alistair to this miserable wretch forever. He lowered his hand. "If you are not gone from this city by nightfall," he said, voice devoid of emotion, "I will not kill you. I will let the men you owe find you, and I will pay them double to keep you alive as long as possible." Faircross scrambled to his feet, slipping on the polished floor, and bolted through the door without looking back, tearing into the crowded street. Silence descended on the shop. Alistair turned to Isolde, looking at the crushed letters, at the fierce, unyielding set of her jaw. "He threatened you," he said quietly. "He tried," Isolde corrected, stepping off the letters and walking toward him. "It did not work. I told you, Alistair." I do not need you to be my shield against the world. I am my own armor. Alistair let out a long, ragged breath, pulling her into his arms, burying his face in the crook of her neck, breathing in the faint scent of lavender and the sharp metallic tang of adrenaline. I know, he whispered against her skin. I know you are. Society expected an explosion. A duel at dawn, a scandalous trial, a bloody public ruination. Instead, nothing happened. Julian Faircross vanished into the belly of a cargo ship bound for the colonies, fleeing his creditors in the dead of night, never seen in polite society again. He became a ghost, a cautionary tale whispered in gentlemen's clubs and gambling hells. Alistair did not pursue him. He did not buy the ship's debt or send agents to hunt the man down. He simply let him go. A choice that baffled his peers and frustrated the gossips. The ruthless Duke of Thornecliffe had held his enemy's throat beneath his boot and simply stepped away. They did not understand that the Duke had found something far more valuable than revenge. He had found peace. 2 weeks later, a heavy travelling carriage rolled up the long, winding drive of Thorncliffe Manor. The bleak, brutal winter had finally broken. The snowdrifts had melted into rushing becks, and the jagged fells were softening with the first stubborn patches of green heather. Alistair stepped out of the carriage first, not waiting for the footman, and turned to offer his hand. Isolde took it, stepping down onto the gravel courtyard, breathing deep. The air here was sharp, clean, entirely free of the suffocating soot and gossip of the city. It smelled of wet earth and possibility. Mrs. Pemberton stood on the top step, flanked by the household staff, her stern face breaking into a rare, genuine smile as she curtsied. "Welcome home, your graces." "Thank you, Mrs. Pemberton," Isolde said warmly. "It is very good to be back." Alistair did not let go of her hand as they walked up the steps into the grand foyer. The house was no longer a dark fortress. The heavy curtains were pulled back, pale spring sunlight washing over the oak paneling, the hearths bright and welcoming rather than desperate and necessary. "I have papers to sign in the study," Alistair said, glancing at the stack of correspondence waiting on the silver salver. He looked at Isolde, thumb tracing circles on the back of her hand. "Will you join me? I find I have little interest in reviewing estate ledgers without my partner." Isolde smiled. A true smile, one that reached her grey eyes and softened the sharp angles of her face. "I will join you shortly. There is something I must do first." Alistair nodded, bringing her knuckles to his lips for a brief, warm kiss before heading down the corridor toward his study. Isolde turned and climbed the grand staircase, not toward the master suite, but down the long hallway to the Rose guest chamber. She opened the door. The room was immaculate, dusted and silent, the heavy four-poster bed made with crisp linen, the hearth cold. She stood in the doorway, remembering the terrifying heat of the fever, the smell of sickness, the absolute certainty of her own ruin. She remembered waking to see the dark, cynical man sitting in the chair by the window. She had been a pawn discarded in the snow. He had been a predator hunting for vengeance. They had used each other, forged a weapon out of a marriage of convenience to strike back at a world that had wronged them. But somewhere in the crossfire, the weapon had broken, and they had been left with nothing but each other. Isolde walked to the window and looked out over the rolling fells. The ruins of the old chapel were visible in the distance, a grey smudge against the greening hills. She did not hate it anymore. She did not fear the cold. She closed the door to the guest chamber, leaving the ghosts of the past behind in the quiet room, and walked down the hall, her steps light and purposeful, toward the study. She was going to help her husband manage an empire. She was going to build a life on her own terms. She was Isolde Vane, Duchess of Thorncliffe. She had been left in the cold to die, but she had chosen to burn instead, and she had taken the devil himself down into the fire with her.